I'm Matthew Kerbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show. I'm very excited to have with me today Bob Glaves of the Chicago Bar Foundation. Welcome to Law Subscribed.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm thrilled to be here.
I probably should have had you on a long time ago because I've had a lot of guests on the podcast that have gone through the Justice Entrepreneur Project, which we'll talk about. But it was this podcaston.org idea. They reached out to me. They said you should find a nonprofit that is in line with the podcast. And they reached out to all these different hosts and said the same thing. And I was thinking to myself, well, I don't normally think of the Chicago Bar Foundation as a nonprofit, but you are. And the work that you do is really important. And so how about I probably should have had you on regardless of the podcaston.org reaching out, but tell people about who you are, what is the Chicago Bar Foundation, and how long you've been doing things there.
Well, thank you. I am a director at the Chicago Bar Foundation for more than 25 years now. I had started in private practice as a commercial and tort litigator, and I really liked practicing law. So I moved over here to this role in 1999, and a lot of people assume, oh, you must be so happy not practicing. And it wasn't, that's not what I moved, right? It was like the idea of being able to focus on the work we're doing here. But the one thing I did not like about practicing was the traditional law firm business model. And so, as we'll talk about a little bit more, that began to intersect with the role at the CBF here too. So I'll use CBF for short. But for people who aren't familiar with the CBF, we are the charitable arm of the Chicago Bar Association, which I'm going to guess most people could gather that part. But we are where the legal community in Chicago comes together to support pro bono and legal aid and access to justice, and really focus, both on supporting the many great organizations and the many great lawyers who do this work, but also tackling some of the bigger macro systemic issues that affect access to justice through advocacy and other means. And so one of those that everybody can relate to who's a litigator is the growing number of people who come to court on their own now. So we do a lot of work with the courts, but we also advocate government at all levels and for issues that affect everybody and where nobody could really do this well on your own. Like we really need more of a community presence, and that's become kind of our role in the Chicago area here.
But you've been with the CBF for a long time, for 25 years. A lot has changed in that time, just in the way lawyers practice law, in technology. I mean, and then the pandemic just seemed to accelerate things like crazy with the way that lawyers practice law. So, like, what was your perspective on all that for that whole time? Did you feel a little bit like you were shouting from the mountaintops and no one was listening to you about the law firm business model? Then all of a sudden, this technology, like, did that like make any change, any difference there?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when I hit the 25-year mark and we were hitting the end of the year this past year of 24. Realized 25 years before that was Y2K, and for people old enough to remember Y2K, some people thought the world was going to end, but most people thought we might have a big tech crash at least. Not maybe the whole world not ending, but like a big tech crash. But the understanding of technology, the internet was obviously out there, but it was in the newer thing. These smartphones were not a thing yet. Nobody would even have dreamed of those. Cell phones weren't even like ubiquitous yet, like where you could just talk on a phone like that. So technology was in a very different place. So yeah, it's changed quite a bit, and I would not tell you I would have seen that part coming. But as we started working on that, just incorporating basic technology like what's now become Illinois Legal Aid Online, we were one of the founders of that when it was still like questionable whether low income and disadvantaged people would be able to use the internet. And now it's fairly commonly understood that's not a big issue, but like that was a big deal to have a central internet based source of information for people who were just trying to figure out what's going on, get good information about their legal problems. So that was an early kind of thing. But yeah, things shifted. But where I think a lot of the opportunity for change and thinking more broadly about the profession started to come out of the Great Recession. And the term that's been we've used many times now since then, but a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. It's been put different ways, but like a crisis allows people to step back and really think about, everything's on the table basically to do things differently, almost by necessity. And So for the Great Recession, for lawyers who were out by then or people who were in law school then will remember it that more than any one thing, I think, really upended the legal market, the lawyer market, I mean. So like the traditional law firms and government entities and everybody else, I mean, we were in such a crisis there economically that the usual career path from law school was really upended quite a bit. And that was what really gave us an opening in many ways to start thinking differently about are there other business models we could come up with that will help people coming out who are entrepreneurial and want to do something different, more public service oriented, but have their own practice. And maybe again, there weren't going to be private options for that, but this was almost right away made for disruption because you're your own boss. So we had the idea for an incubator that would become the Justice Entrepreneurs Project.
Yeah, I still will go and I'll, like, talk to high school kids that are thinking about becoming a lawyer, and they don't know that since the Great Recession, that's not a surefire way to living a decent life and earning a decent income. Yeah, and because there's still this illusion to the general public that, "Oh, yeah, you go become a lawyer, you'll make a bunch of money, you'll be alright." But that just hasn't been true since then, and yet law school has only gotten more expensive.
Yeah, yeah, no, it sure has, and the obviously the legal market recovered as a whole, but like I'm not sure what the stats would have been before then, but less than 20% of the professional practices in large firms, corporate kind of models that I think most people going to school dream of, and particularly when they see the price of tuition, they dream of wanting to make those kind of salaries. So there's lots of other paths in the profession, lots of great paths for public service, working full time in legal aid and others. And one of the, some of the issues that we work on related to that are making sure people get paid well, no, they're making a financial sacrifice if they go into legal aid or public service, but being paid enough that you can make a good living and, in the traditional sense, you're not maybe going to get rich, but that you're going to be able to make a good living and do something productive. And that involves, both what you get paid, but also student debt, trying to come up with solutions around student debt. And I feel like that might have been when I first met you was working on that very issue, which is still an issue today that's partly the price of law school and why that's gotten so high and can there be more breaks on that, but also just having a more income-based repayment approach where people, depending on where they go in the path, can pay something that's appropriate for their income, which there are some avenues for that, but to have that be more the model overall is what we're really trying to work towards, I should say. It's a work in progress, let's just say that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, really going back to it, let's think. So we met at ABA Day. I wanna say it was 2014. So Bob, we've known each other for 10 years now. How about that, huh?
Yeah, great.
I mean, 10 years in the blink of an eye. I wasn't even a practicing attorney at the time. I was just a third-year law student. I was chair of the ABA, law student division, and we were lobbying Congress about keeping public student loan forgiveness, which was on the table to be cut off. And as we do every year for ABA Day, making sure Legal Services Corporation continues to get funding because I know some of their funding goes to, get spread out throughout the country to legal aid organizations so that folks who can't afford legal services get, those programs are funded to help people get legal services through legal aid organizations. And I understand that's also what the Chicago Bar Foundation is doing. But then there's this massive middle of folks who don't even qualify for legal aid, and yet there's they need it and they can afford to pay something, but they need to know what that's going to be, right? And like I kind of learned a little bit about this when I was learned about the access to justice problem, and I was learning about this when I was a law student, and then continuing into practice. And I really think that there's this market opportunity. That's like the whole thesis for my business model for my law firm and what you're doing with the Justice Entrepreneurs Project is you're helping lawyers design practices to have a decent income while helping people who can afford to pay something, filling that gap of what legal aid won't cover. And you're not going to be a multimillionaire lawyer at a big law firm doing something like that. But let's be real, they're giving up family life, they're giving up balance. You can't pay me enough to give that stuff up. And I think that some of the lawyers who come through your program at the CDF probably feel the same way. So is that right? Like did that program sort of also come out of legal aid simply won't help everybody?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's a bit more to that. So let me just step back a little bit. Yes, that is
Yeah.
the thrust of it is there's this huge middle market, missing middle. It's called different things, but legal aid for starters is our traditional helping low income disadvantaged people is really the thrust of legal aid
Mhm.
because they are often the most vulnerable people and usually the most vulnerable people in the community. And legal aid has never had enough funding to help all those folks. So that's why we advocate for the Legal Services Corporation funding for state equivalent of that here in Illinois, and really just with private donations as well through our own work at the CBF and with partners around the country to try to better fund the legal aid system, get pro bono people involved, pro bono lawyers. I mean, pro bono people, pro bono lawyers involved to help people working hand in hand with those organizations. But really, you need that legal aid core to effectively meet that. But the people who qualify for legal aid are roughly a quarter of our community, 25%, and more than half of them are getting turned away as it is. So, and then you have about another 25-30% on the other side, people who are larger companies, wealthy individuals who can afford traditional market rates for lawyers. But you have all these people in the middle who, to your point, make too much to qualify what's already overstretched legal aid and not enough for that traditional market model. And, there's a few exceptions in there, like contingent fees for personal injury cases and other ones that function really well in the market, but for all incomes. But most people are kind of like out there trying to, and they are a large percentage, we started to realize, of the people who come to court on their own because they simply can't. They don't know where to find affordable help, or they've tried and they know they can't find it. So yeah, that was like kind of during the Great Recession, that group what we were seeing on the ground, that group was growing of people who were kind of caught in that middle who might never have been there before. And so the JP had a twofold purpose. One was give entrepreneurial lawyers who are public service minded an umbrella and a program to help them launch really innovative businesses and try to better, meet the market there. For small businesses fall into that too. So individuals in the middle, and then some small businesses that aren't not the kind that are getting VC funding, which is your typical mom and pop business is not getting VC funding. So that's the other part of that market that's sort of, well, that's sort of, that is the target, that really underserved market. And really stepping back, how did it get like this? Why do we have this big middle gap? We have more lawyers than we've ever had in the country. That's been true every year since I met you in 2014. There's more every year in Illinois and throughout the country. What is the deal? I mean, that's the classic definition of a market failure. We have more lawyers than we've ever had. We have more people not getting help than we've ever had. So there was the target, and we did a lot of analysis of was bringing me back to my practicing lawyer days, because when we would have small businesses who needed help or individuals, I was running into these same issues with our billable hour model at the firm.
Mhm.
That there are people on budget, and you tell them, we think it's going to cost this. You got to put this much up right away, and this was not ever a small amount either. Didn't go over great. And then when you try to do that in a traditional law firm model, when you try to experiment with fee structures, it's also hard because they're looking at everything through the billable hour lens. So you bring in X amount on this case, you're still tracking your time. It's like, was that a good deal or was that not a good deal if you use the alternative fee structure? So it's not, the traditional model doesn't lend itself well to changing. So I already knew that when I came here in 1999, but then here we are, and we're in like 2010, really trying in earnest, trying to start what would become the JEP program in early 2013 when it formally launched. And that was sort of all what we were looking at. So I could tell you more about what we found there, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't want to keep jabbing along
no,
here. So
I want to learn, like, so it's been a little over 10 years since you had the program, so I definitely wanna hear about, the successes, the failures, the lessons, but I also wanna point out for the listeners that in particular, we might be getting some listeners that are not in the legal industry, which is my typical audience, that law school doesn't teach you how to practice law.
no,
It doesn't teach you how to start a law firm. The law professors themselves maybe never practiced. And if they did, they went to Ivy League schools, they practiced in big law, or they clerked for judges, and they teach you how to be an appellate attorney. But most lawyers don't actually end up doing that. And so, like I've been an advocate for a long time that law schools should look at the JEP And they should be doing something like that in the law school because you charge lawyers for it. It's not free. It's reasonably priced. But the type of business that you get after going through that, I mean, the substantial revenue, like the potential revenue that you could generate is significant, even while helping people and charging lower fees. Because there's this massive market opportunity. People say to me all the time, "Bob, well, aren't you worried about competition? You have this podcast, you teach other lawyers how to have subscription-based legal services." And no, because all I need is like several dozen clients, and I'll be okay. I'll have a sustainable business. There's plenty of market opportunity, and folks just like lawyers have such a closed mindset on that. So I'm just curious to know to get your feedback on that, but then also tell us about what you've seen with the JEP program over the last decade.
Yeah, well, let's talk with law school first. I mean, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, you're absolutely right. You learn to think like a lawyer. You learn some of the basics, and if you do clinics and things like that, you might learn a little bit about practicing. But the business of law is rarely taught, and there are certainly that's probably another podcast to discuss it. But there are certainly ways you could rethink the third year of law school where you have some idea of what path you may be taking where if you were going to go into a small firm, solo firm kind of structure at some point, you would learn more about this stuff as your third year, hands on, so that you're more like what we do in the JEP. But since that's not the case, you've got people who are often learning, still learning to be lawyers. In the early stages, we had newer lawyers. Typically, we have a lot more lateral lawyers coming into the program these days. But lawyers who want to be their own bosses, want to do things differently, and want to give back. That combo there, that's the reason most people they're doing things differently, maybe not, but the other two are the reason most people go to law school in the first place.
Right.
And so if you can make a good living, and to your point, there's a huge opportunity in this market right now. So what we had to do was really analyze why is that market? How did that develop? And while we can't stick it all on the billable hour, it's pretty clear that starting around the 70s when that became the prevalent license pricing model in the profession is when we started to see the gap between regular people and access. It used to
Right.
be like you could be a solo practitioner in a small town, big town, wherever, make a really good living serving people who could afford you, who were middle class people, and everybody might even live in the same community. And that has changed a lot, to say the least, over time. And that can't be the only thing, but because the price of law school has risen in it, but like when we've analyzed this, the complexity of the system and the billable hour are the two that jump out the most, and our failure to really think about regulation of the profession in a modern way would be number three before you get to, us to law school even, which obviously is a problem. The billable hour, when you take that off the table, people who live on a budget would like a price. They also billable hours are all based on how much, and you know this, and you preach this well. And for a regular listener of your podcast, you all know this already. But people are not buying your time; they are buying a solution to a problem, or to manage a risk, or something that they're looking to do. Peace of mind, all those could be all of the above, but they are trying to get your help to do something. And when they think about time, they think about almost, with very rare exceptions, they would like it done quicker rather than longer, right?
Right. Right.
So if you're a bill of hour lawyer, everything you got going is not lining up with what they're looking for. Because if you actually solve their problem right away and you're just a great lawyer, you've just made yourself like a fraction of the value you just provided to that person. So it's just disconnected from what people are looking for. But the other thing they're looking for is some price certainty. If you live on a budget, and this would be me personally too, like if I have to go get legal help for anything significant, we're very fortunate to have a community of lawyers we work with who can usually help out with things. But
Right.
if we have to go get something, we're on a budget too. I need to know, have some semblance, can use a credit card and other things, but what is this going to cost? If you're trying to size up whether this is a reasonable solution, unless you're in a serious emergency situation like you're in jail, where they don't typically bill by the hour, by the way, in the criminal side.
Right.
But unless you're in that kind of situation, which is not usually what's going on, that's not going to make sense to people. So that was one of the original things, was pricing differently than the billable hour was one of the principles of the JEP. Thinking about limited scope representation when it's a reasonable solution, where you represent somebody for some of their matter and they can do some of the things on their own to give them more options. and then using technology that you referred to right out of the gate. And so lawyers in the program, we've had close to 100 lawyers, I think, go through, and almost 60 were still part of the network today, either in the program or alums of the program who are still in the network. And many have been very successful. We have a couple firms that have gotten to more than $1 million in revenue a year, primarily serving this market. So to your point about there being a market opportunity, that is the exception. I mean that's like higher end of it, but there are a lot of people making a decent living, have some control over their lives because it's their practice. You've had some of them on who are either from our program or some like Lauren Lester in Colorado. I know you've had on who's built an amazing practice without the benefit of a JEP, but like very similar principles behind it. Not everybody makes it. I mean, building your own business is hard no matter what your business is, but a lot have. And so we want to continue to build that structure. And just like you, this market is so big, we would want more people doing this separate from the JEP, and we want more people. So I'm really happy to know you're out here with this podcast, really pushing to get this more out in the community and get people thinking differently. Because as we jump ahead, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but in this age of AI, billable hours stuck in there pretty well for most of the profession up to now. But that really isn't going to work for anybody pretty soon. When you have things that can just instantly rip off documents and that you just review quickly and stuff, that's just not going to be a good value model for lawyers or people. So,
You said it, Bob. I agree 100% with the AI thing. I mean, you've been preaching it for years, and you have a great blog through the CBF where you talk about things like this all the time, and I highly recommend, and we'll link to that so folks could go read some of Bob's articles over the years about this topic. And I've been talking about it for 4 to 5 years about moving away from billable to subscription and fixed fee billing, because at the end of the day, too, subscription is just a scoped monthly fixed fee. Like that's what it is. That's recurring, right? I was always saying that it was better, more profitable, more client centric to not bill your time. And then AI hit the scene in November of 2022, like actually useful Gen AI. And it's like, oh wow, like yeah, things that used to take hours now take minutes. And now in like present day 2025, it takes like seconds, right? And you could iterate, and have like a much better work product in 5-10 minutes than it would have taken weeks. So if people weren't convinced before, like, yes, the modern technology and where AI is presently and is going, I think that's been the best thing to convince folks that there's ever been.
but where AI
Oh,
is going and where the profession is, I think people are going to get more options whether we want them to or not.
yeah,
I mean, when I say like options that may not be good options, but it's going to be almost impossible to regulate some of these things. And if we don't start building in more realistic models in our profession to help people, they already go around us to a large degree, but that's going to become even more true. But it's going to make it harder for lawyers to price their work that way, and for the courts to operate the way they do either. Like
right.
it's not like it's not going to happen overnight, but it's changing pretty fast. And if you're building a business today, I sure wouldn't start that way.
Yeah. So, going back to your mention of Lauren, because right now we're doing this joint series on how to run a law firm in 2025, and we're trying to apply these same principles and inspire and encourage attorneys to use the things that I know you teach to lawyers in the JEP program. But what I've seen also, speaking of Lauren, and thinking about the attorneys who have come through your program that have been on my podcast, Amanda Carey, Daisy Dominguez, like it's mostly like women attorneys,
Yeah.
and those have been mostly my guests on my podcast. Like the majority are women attorneys. So I'm curious to know, like, if you're collecting demographics through the program, if you're looking at like, who are the ones who are ditching the billable hour and doing something innovative? Because at least my anecdotal experience has been it's mostly women attorneys and attorneys of color who are innovating in the space.
I will say in the JEP, at least, it's been a very diverse network from the beginning and still is today. Um, there are some guys I want to defend our kind here, but there's,
Right, right.
there are a lot of women who are very successful and are, and you just named a couple of them who are, really have built great practices, but but yeah, the common thread is having some entrepreneurial, and not everybody has this, like the hustle and the wanting to. You've had this since the time I met you, but like the idea of subscriptions is such a like when you talk to somebody, and I'm sure you do this every day. The idea of subscription pricing. Think of how many parts of our lives are on subscription pricing right now. People are used to paying a monthly fee for something. They know it's coming. They know what it's for. And yeah, you got to have value for it, but like, assume you're being a good lawyer and you're communicating with your clients and you're setting it up the right way. That's predictable. Build it into the budget. You can make a value proposition of whether it's a good thing for you. It's a great thing for small businesses who are on budgets themselves. Great thing for people who are on budgets. And litigation too, it's like, you can set it up where, as long as the litigation's going, you pay X amount, unless it's the kind of litigation that has like a 1 year dead spot, which is not typical. Some months you're going to work more as a lawyer than others, and some cases you're going to have to work more than others, but over multiple cases, you can come up with a model that works out and take some experimentation. Again, this is typical of any innovation, adaptation. You've lived it. I won't go into it because you talk about this a lot on this podcast, but it's such it feels obvious once you hear it, right? But like it's such an important piece to start building into our profession more.
Yeah, and look, even for the lawyer listeners, every episode could be their first episode, right? So just to hammer home that point, Bob, what you just said is really important. Lawyers, we have a tendency to overthink things. Lawyers are some of the smartest people I know, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a lawyer and you're a lawyer, Bob. It's true. Like you pursue this route because you have a certain level of intelligence or desire to help people. You see problems, you want to go out there and you want to solve them, you want to fix them. But they hyper focus now on, well, like, oh no, like this case is going to take too long. Or, for example, I do per page pricing for fully unbundled legal services. I once had a lawyer ask me at a CLE, she said, well, what if like, yeah, you got boilerplate and those pages are easy, but what if like you keep going back and forth on this indemnification clause or like some particularly complicated part? I was like, yeah, so that's one page. Of the whole document, like it all balances out. And so we fixate on this one thing or this, oh, did this case take too much time? But if you look at it from a portfolio perspective, if you look at it over the length of the representation of this client, that they're going to be happy that they were able to budget for it. And you might have not, like the opportunity cost, you might have not gotten that revenue at all. If you were just focused on just maximizing profit in the short term, you're going to lose out on profit in the long term. And profit in the long term takes time. So the cost is spread out so the client could budget for it. And so it just makes sense that way, which brings me back to another thing. Most lawyers, in my experience, if they really needed to, couldn't even afford their own legal services. Like everybody has a budget. Everybody, like would like to know something, but they never stop and think about, if I had to hire myself, would I be able to?
Yeah. We've had that conversation quite a bit, in the early days of the JP, but like once you ask someone to think about it, they often will joke that they couldn't. And it's funny among lawyers talking like, but it's not really funny when that's our profession. Like we can't afford our own services. And it is a joke for some people at the higher end of the profession, but it's not for most of us and not in that traditional pricing model at least. So again, you've got like contingent isn't going to work for every case, but like when the contingent fee can work, it's a great model, and it's a great example of every time you take a contingent case as a personal injury lawyer, and the very best will tell you this, you there's a chance you're going all the way to trial and maybe even appeal, and it's the same rate. It may go up a little bit for an appeal, but let's just say for trial, it's typically a third has been, the most common market model. Rarely does the case actually go all the way to trial, but it's still for every single person, they get access for uh, not no upfront fee, right? They get the contingent. So if the case settles early, you have the benefit of getting your money early. The lawyer may versus the time they put in, but the value the lawyer provided isn't really different at all. The amount of time they put in may be very different, but that's a classic example of what you were referring to. Like if you priced every case like you had to go to trial, well, that that would be really expensive. But since very few end up going all the way to trial, you just have to price it knowing that some of them will. And so that model is historically built. A lot of criminal areas of criminal law are like that too. There's going to be some that turn more complicated, but they're typically more fixed fee basis. And those just happen to be the areas of the market that have not had the gaps that we're talking about for everyday people. So there you go. That's a simple thing to take away from here that if more people start doing this, more people are going to be able to afford it. Obviously, you've got to give them good legal services, be value oriented. Some are even being, there's firms that have been doing this for longer than the JEP's been around, but like coming up with bonuses for getting something done quickly, the opposite of the billable hour, right? You will make more if you can resolve this quickly for somebody.
It's hard for
Um,
lawyers to wrap their mind around when
it
they hear
is,
stuff
isn't
like
it?
that.
Yeah, yeah. And but then you have all your incentives on the lawyer side are then to you're not going to do extra work just for the heck of it. You're going to try to like really think through what do I need to do to best serve this client and get them the right result.
Yeah,
And
look,
yeah,
I think billable hour quotas are probably unethical, right? Think about it. Now you're incentivizing the lawyers to hit their bonus, that they have to just bill clients more. They're gonna find hours to bill. Of course they are.
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, some I'm convinced are busy enough that that's not a that's not an issue. Like a lot of the lawyers we work with, and I want to be clear, we have no qualms with big law, for the people who are in it. Um,
Well, they're doing pro
but
bono hours, so of course not.
well, no, there's pro bono, but they're also I know some very happy people who built careers in big law who are great lawyers. They're great people. It's not for everybody though. You are going to work a lot typically to succeed in that business and in that environment. But even if it was for everybody, it isn't for everybody. There's not enough of those positions. So there's only so much of our profession that could even practice a big law if they wanted to. And so there's always going to be this bigger market of people who aren't big law clients and lawyers who are not going to be serving that clientele either. And we as a profession, which is why this has become a thing for the CBF, how these two things came together. This is the kind of thing where as a legal community, we got to come together to come up with some better solutions here because the idea that, you know, more than two-thirds of the people in our community can't afford or find legal help when they need it is untenable for our profession and for our justice system. The whole idea of equal access to justice, what does that even mean? So and that's not just more funding for legal aid going to solve it. That's never going to solve the folks in this middle part. So we're always going to keep working to get more funding and support for legal aid to have them be able to help more people. But like the people in the middle, we need the market to work better.
Yeah, yeah. That makes me think again about Illinois Legal Aid Online, which I know is one of the things that the CBF has been involved with over the years. They've now integrated like an AI solution that's able to answer questions about what's on the website because there's so much information, it's hard to find. And I even sometimes folks come to me and $20 a month is too much for them, right? And like so I will just refer them to Illinois Legal Aid Online. And sometimes people come to me with things that like a name change, like a legal name change. Well, Illinois Legal Aid Online has a great, like, automation for that. Like, they don't need like, you don't pay me for that. Like, it's already there. Like, if you really need a lawyer, like, sure, I'm here for you if you wanna do that. But, like, there are some great things on that platform, and now AI has only enhanced that, and it's legal information, not legal advice. And so, if looking into a crystal ball here and seeing what Illinois Legal Aid is doing with AI and helping those people, right? Like, what do you think? Like, this is just the beginning, Bob. Like, what do you think is going to happen with AI and legal services or legal information so people could self serve in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we think about this. I think about this a lot, but I think we think about this a lot strategically too. If you think of a spectrum of what legal problems people have, typically, there's the very serious things where we're always going to need lawyers. In the corporate world, they call it bet the company litigation, right? That
Right.
these are things that can affect your very existence. We're always going to have that. We're always going to need lawyers there. They could be more efficient and effective using AI for sure, but we're going to need lawyers and in our system there. And then on the other side, you've got like your cell phone contract or something like which no one ever reads. I shouldn't say no one, but lawyers are probably the worst offenders, not reading contracts and signing them.
We
But
know
like,
better, and we
yeah,
still don't read them.
yeah. But like if you have an issue with that, you can't. It wouldn't even make sense to hire a lawyer. So being able to find some information about what you can do if you have a dispute, and they may actually help you navigate that kind of stuff very effectively on your own. You also have some people who are just more tech savvy and more comfortable using that kind of tech who can go further up that spectrum to do things on their own. They're going to be more willing to do it. But as the stakes rise and the power dynamics change, that's where typically where lawyers are always going to be critical and they still have a role to play on the bottom, like what you're doing already. If you're being straight with somebody when they come to you and you say, "Look, I think you could do most of this on your own. You could pay me a consultation fee and I could give you the overview. And then I think you can go do this on your own and for free." Or, but that's an example of limited scope. Or maybe it's they go try to see what they can come up with on their own, and they come back to you and you review it and make sure it looks, sound, and that's your instead of doing start to finish. But you start to put more choice in the consumer's hands at this point, which will make our system better for everybody. And I you could come up with all kinds of analogies, but like the Home Depot one is one I've used, and others have used for a long time. I'm not the most handy guy around, but, like, there's certain things I can do on my own. If you go into Home Depot, they'll show you what to do, like, you buy the stuff, you go do it. There's more that I could do on my own than I do on my own because time, to me, is valuable, so I could paint my house. I'm not gonna do it, not now, at least. I did that when I was younger, but, like, right now, I could pay somebody, and that's a better deal to me, but I could if I had to, and if we start thinking of law that way in terms of, like, we aren't the gatekeeper every time. I think it's always going to be useful to have an honest broker help you figure out what's right for you, but people those choices. I think you're going to find lawyers are still going to be real busy. There's still plenty of people are going to want their help, but it'll be more affordable and accessible to them if we are incorporating these other solutions. And to your point, I'm sure you've been to some of the same panels I have where they're talking about what we think of AI right now as versus what it might be in 5 to 10 years. There's some saying, like, we always overestimate what will happen in the first year or 2 of a new technology like this and underestimate what it's gonna look like in 10 years. It could be a radically different world. If we aren't thinking of, like, how to think about that in our service profile now, we should start thinking about it right away.
Yeah, part of when I first started giving these talks and these CLE presentations, I was also saying how, like, we have a monopoly on legal services. Like, we may lose that monopoly if we don't adapt. Now we may lose it anyway if we do adapt, just because of the needs are getting higher and the AI is getting better. And yes, sure, we regulate ourselves for now, but we might not always regulate ourselves as a profession. And with what's going on in Arizona right now with alternative business structures, at the time that we're recording not long ago, what is KPMG is now getting approved to come in and disrupt legal services in that market. And look, they say it's going to help increase access to justice. Let's see. I'm a little skeptical about that, about where they're actually going to try to serve people. But yeah, I mean, I welcome the challenge because I think once lawyers have to compete, like I said, I think lawyers are some of the smartest people. I think if they pretend that the billable hour is going to be banned in 6 months, and you have to come up with a program and a plan to adapt to that, they're going to do it. And I've recommended that, and I've seen people, adapt a subscription model because of that. So I think one way or another, whether it's 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, we're going to be forced to adapt. So it behooves the legal professionals to start adapting right now.
Yeah, yeah, and, I think a lot of times, lawyers think, "Well, only we can represent somebody in court." Well, court filings already are down by a lot, and if the court system is that's another issue we work on quite a bit is how can we simplify the system so that it's complex when it needs to be, but there's so many ways complex when it doesn't need to be. And AI is going to help cut through that on the way anyway, to cut
Right.
through some of the complexity for regular people. But a lot more will get resolved outside of court. It's already happening. If we can embed that better in the court system, where it's more affordable and to do that, yes, lawyers will still be involved, but they won't be involved maybe to the degree they are now. Goes back to the, billable hour piece again. So like if that's how you're making your living is spending a lot of time in court or a lot of time completing forms for people, well, that is shifting already and it's gonna shift even more and where it's not gonna fly.
Look, legal tech is available to attorneys to productize their legal services or streamline or automate these things that either we can still sort of have a manual process in doing, like a longtime supporter of my podcast has been Gavel, used to be Documate. They're behind some platforms like Hello Divorce and some of these other productized legal services to try to just make all this stuff more affordable. I'm one of the panel attorneys on the Hello Prenup platform for Illinois, and we have to agree to a low fixed fee to provide legal advice on the prenups that we're already very familiar with. So it's not like we're even spending a lot of time anyway. And these are for folks where there's not like the uber, rich and wealthy getting prenups. It's like everyday people that just want to keep separate things separate and joint things joint. But under Illinois like law and not under law, under Illinois precedent, and just as a good rule of thumb, if each side has an attorney that advises them before they sign and makes some adjustments, it's going to be more enforceable. So like, yeah, I agree with you that lawyers are still going to be part of this process. It's just going to be truncated and more efficient. And the legal tech is already there. It's in play today to make things more efficient and more affordable.
So, there's lots with the business structure thing. I think, that's again, that could be its own thing. KPMG is on hold, by the way, in Arizona right this minute. They put a hold on it, but
Oh,
but
okay.
it's coming. They've been in the UK and Australia for a long time, and there are still big firms in the UK and Australia who are doing quite well. So it's not like, they take over the market, but they do add these different things, and they tend to do it in specific areas of the law. They're not trying to do big litigation. They're helping people with other types of issues that and getting firms then compete better with that where they are, right? But still successfully. So
Right.
but yes, we can add quite a bit, and being able to have lawyers be able to work with other professionals and be able to work with technology more seamlessly. Our regulations were written for literally a different era than we're in right now and where we're going. And so modernizing the way we regulate the profession so that lawyers responsibly can do this. So I want to stress that. I mean, I think a lot of people look at what's happened in medicine and otherwise where that hasn't always worked out so great for lawyers. I mean, excuse me, for doctors, hospitals, other medical professionals. To have private equity owning them, and they feel like they've lost control. But there's not really that's not the Arizona model. You can't just come in and do that in Arizona. You're going to be regulated by virtue of being able to do it in Arizona, and you're going to agree to some principles. That is sort of the approach that wouldn't have to be exactly that, but that's the approach that I think we got to start looking at. So that lawyers, that is the one thing I think in JEP that we would like to do more of is you're trying to start a business, be a good lawyer, be on top of technology, do all these things. That's pretty hard to do. To find one person who can do all those things, to be able to network some of that stuff, which we're able to do under the umbrella of the JEP for people in the program, but, like, to have other networks who can do that, it shouldn't be a it's the way big firms have all these other professionals built into their model, nobody in a small or even mid-sized firm can do that, but, like, if you can network some of that where you've got marketing muscle, you've got tech knowledge, tech savvy, and you can just be a good lawyer in your area, priced well, of course, innovatively, but, like, do your work, we'd have a lot more people doing it if they could do that more seamlessly. Right now, that is not seamless at all under the current regulatory model, and so one way or another, it's gonna end up there. It's a when, not an if, but we're trying to move that when up a little bit earlier here with our advocacy, and we're not the only ones, so hopefully we're gonna get there.
Yeah, and on that note, shout outs to a former CBF employee, Jess Bednar's, and the Above the Line network that she started over at Isles, because that's
Yep.
also trying to it's still early, and I'm a member, I'm a proud member. They're trying to do that. They're trying to, be the non-JEP, and of course, she was involved with JEP, version of that for lawyers who haven't gone through the JEP program.
Yeah, we're a partner in that too, by the way. So, because
Yeah.
there's, the JEP model, but there's gonna be other models like your own and Laurens that around the country and into Canada that have never been networked together, but like to be able to see what's working and build off of each other. That's the idea of above the line. And yes, that's a great uh, Jess and Roya Samagandi on our team is the other co-leader of that effort. But there's just great people already involved, and that was a real void out there nationally and internationally. We learned quickly there's more than 100 members in the first 6 months of the network from most states and several of the provinces of Canada. So I think one of the goals for the program this year is to get every state and every province in Canada represented. And I think it's doable,
I think it's doable. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, lots to come. So
Yeah, and for folks, if you haven't heard it, Roya and Jess were on my podcast episode 71.5. So if you want to learn more about the Above the Line Network, you could go check out that episode. I've had some really great takeaways from this conversation, Bob, like even from my own practice, right? Like thinking about, yes, you could paint your own house, like the Home Depot, analogy that you gave. Like, literally, like, I'm thinking like, "Oh, yeah, like, I could clean my own gutters, but I don't. I outsource that because that's dangerous," like, yes, I could go up and, like, bring down a broken branch that broke in the tree when we got that microburst storm, but no, like, I hired, like, people to come and, like, take down that branch and take down that now broken tree, right? Like, I could have finagled some of it to save some money, but, like, I'm, like, literally putting my life on the line by climbing up on a roof or climbing up on a tree. It is worth whatever it is, and I still got 3 quotes and, picked the middle one, right? That's what you do. But like, I didn't wanna take on that risk. The problem is, what I'm trying to think about and, like, workshop right now is that's a obvious visible risk. Like, that's an easily knowable risk.
Right,
Legal risks, whew, like, you don't know what you don't know if you're an everyday consumer of legal services or not, because
right.
you need predictable pricing. Like, how do I know what the legal risks are when I don't have a good like, we as a society don't do a good job educating people about civics? So, like, that is like, how do you solve that problem? And then it's a no-brainer, to hire an affordable attorney on an affordable subscription, right? Because now you could at least talk to them. Hey, is this a problem? Yeah. Yeah. And like issue spotting, which is one of the first things you learn how to do in law school, becomes like a really valuable service that you could provide to your clients because they don't know how to spot the legal risks. Um,
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
takeaway number one. Do you have any feedback on that before I give takeaway
No,
number
no,
two?
I think you're right, and I think, uh, helping educate people about what the risks are and being an honest broker, though, when you do it, I think is what is gonna be key to success. Letting people know, like, you're in a low risk environment here. You might even for a low risk have enough money or have the risk tolerance that you're gonna want the lawyer to do it anyway. I used to do the gutters. I'm same with you. I'm not doing that anymore. Not for a long time, actually, for that exact reason. But you're right. That's a knowable risk. So I don't have the same balance I did when I was younger. So, but yeah, I think educating people and making sure we're being honest about the options for them and the risk assessment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great
And
takeaway.
takeaway number two is, you brought up those like terms of service for our phone plans, for our internet provider, for whatever, right? Frankly, I'm a former insurance defense attorney, right? Like our insurance contracts. So like contracts of adhesion that we agree to all the time, just doing some programming like around, here are your obligations. You couldn't even negotiate this if you wanted to. Do you want to have a cell phone? Do you want to have internet?
Right.
Do you want to use LinkedIn? Do you want to use this legal software to help your practice? Or software, in your business or in your life or whatever. You want to agree to Disney Plus arbitration things. Like, here's just and you could probably use AI like to like go through it and like identify these things. Like, here's your obligations. And that's just like legal information. Right. This is not advice to anybody. Like, this is what your obligations are according to this contract. And I think there could be some interesting like content around something like that.
Agreed. And I think you could make it easier for people to advocate for themselves under the limited rights that you weren't able to negotiate, but to be able to do that if we were able, you know,
Right, at least know what you're getting yourself into, which is part of the problem, and, like, I don't even know I'm agreeing to binding arbitration, in this other situation when I'm signing up for Disney Plus, right? Like, I mean,
right.
ridiculous, you know? I suppose there's a I guess there might be an argument that maybe don't teach people about it because now they could say, well, no reasonable person would ever really agree to that. But if like there's a lawyer out there saying, oh, look, here's this thing, but a
Well,
contract of adhesion is a contract of adhesion. It's
I was
still,
just gonna say, if you want Disney Plus or you want a cell phone, you're you're probably agreeing to it anyway, but, like, if you at least know what you can do when you have an issue, it'll help you.
yeah. Yeah, there's a legal product for that somewhere. So again, I'm a
Go
philosophy
for it.
major with a law degree. I can't make that product, but if somebody wanted to make like a Chrome plugin that uses AI to scrawl the terms of service or something and like just say, okay, here are these pretty strenuous obligations. I mean, I don't know. I'd pay $5 a month for something like that, right? Like, just to know, maybe.
To know
So
and to give you some practical advice of, like, when you actually have a problem, right? Like, filing for arbitration is not an easy thing when you have an arbitration contract, but I think most people don't even consider it, So, like, when would you consider it, and how would you do it if you had to do it, right? So,
yeah. Well, time flew. I appreciate you coming on the show. I just have two more questions for you. The last one's a fun one. The first one, though, is how could people support the Chicago Bar Foundation if they wanted to?
well, you can go to our website, which is a longer but easy to remember, chicagobarfoundation.org, chicagobarfoundation.org. There's opportunities to donate. There's information about volunteering and about some of the other work that you may be interested in. You and I met doing advocacy work. Other ways, happy to answer questions so people can get in touch. But donating is probably the easiest path for most people to do that. And we've got a great board and great staff who are going to make sure that's going to where it's needed most and making a big impact.
Excellent. And the last question, and I should say, links to all that in the show notes. And then the last question for you, Bob, is one we like to ask all of our guests, and it's just a fun thing that we do, and that is a hot dog a sandwich and why?
I don't think I worked in a hot dog stand for 8 years, so like you're asking a guy who knows something about this. I do not consider it a sandwich. I think it's its own thing. A hot dog is a hot dog. So it comes on a bun, but in Chicago, there's a very particular kind of hot dog you're going to get. Vienna, preferably, but certainly the way it's dressed and put together. But I love peanut butter and jelly sandwiches too, and I see those as two different things.
All right. Well, once again, Bob, thanks for coming on the podcast Law Subscribed.
Thank you. It was great having this conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.